Welcome back, my fellow patriots, to the Save Our Republic daily episode. Today is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and it is fitting that we spend our time to reflect on him and his legacy. I'm going to spend that time on two major points, which most people don't really give enough consideration to. The first is that he was a reverend. He was a man of God. And he believed very, very fervently in justice, in a creator, in the need for us to bend the arc of history to justice. And if you read his speeches over and over and over again, his religious perspective dominates his viewpoint and his arguments about why we need to have a more just society in connection with racial relations and other issues such as war, poverty, and other opportunities for all people. And, the mass media and educators have done a terrible job in explaining his perspective and why it is so rooted in his belief in a divine figure. And I raise that because it is fundamental to who we are as a people. Again, in the Declaration of Independence, we say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator. So that's fundamental to our view, and it's fundamental to the view of Martin Luther King Jr., and it's really been put in the back shadows and kind of ignored by the mass culture. So I wanted to raise that. The second is his I Have a Dream speech, and really throughout his entire career, he calls upon the Declaration of Independence promise of equality and explains that we need to fulfill it. So I'm going to borrow a little bit of his speech here today, and so that we can really understand that. He talks about the Emancipation Proclamation and how that had freed the slaves. And then he continues, but 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution on the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as our citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. And then he continues to discuss what it would mean to live up to that obligation. And so he truly believed in unalienable rights. You heard that. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the creator, and that all men are created equal, and that we needed to fulfill that promise. And as I reflected a few episodes ago in connection with the Founding Fathers, they were hypocrites, but they need to be acknowledged for setting out that ideal of equality. And Martin Luther King Jr., again, calls upon the nation to live up to that ideal. And that's so fundamentally important for our freedom, liberty, and equality. Until next time, God bless you. God bless America. Have a wonderful Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Don't forget about americasurvivalguide.com, patriotweek.org, and the Patriot Lessons American History and Civics podcast. And as an aside, the podcast has had just released an episode over the weekend about presidential inaugurations. The episode before that was about the 25th Amendment. So if you want to have deep dives into those topics, now is the time. God bless you, and God bless America.